Hello everyone and welcome to episode 9 of the Layton Fitness podcast. So hopefully you've been enjoying all of the episodes, but more importantly, I really hope you've been taking action on all of the principles I've been teaching you within each episode. So in today's episode we're going to be talking about time under tension. Now this is very much a hot topic in the fitness industry at the moment. You may even apply certain time under tension principles within your own training, and we're actually going to discuss whether it's actually important at all or whether it actually can potentially impede other more important factors, which we'll discuss in detail. So first, if you're not aware of what time under tension is, it's the total amount of seconds a muscle group is under tension via a set. So for example, you'll often see certain time under tension figures given for certain exercises, and usually it falls like this. There'll be a number for the eccentric portion of the lift, so this is the lowering phase, or essentially the easier portion of the movement. There'll be another number for the pause at the bottom of the lift, and then there'll be a concentric figure. So some very basic figures, you may see a 3-1-1 tempo, which essentially means a 3-second eccentric, 3-second lowering phase, 1 second pause at the bottom, and then a 1 second up. Or maybe a 3-second lowering phase, a 0 pause at the bottom, and a 1 second up. Now the common thought within the fitness industry is that tension is very important for muscle growth and thus hypertrophy. However, we're going to essentially break this myth in today's podcast. Now before we look at the evidence, my biggest issue with people focusing too much on time under tension, I'm not saying this is totally irrelevant, but certainly protocols where you're essentially creating an artificial tempo, where you're really focusing actually slowing that weight down on the lowering portion of the movement. You'll notice that the load used for the exercise will be significantly reduced. Therefore, this can reduce our total amount of volume. So as I discussed on some of my previous podcasts, I emphasise the importance of volume, how this is the main primary dictator of hypertrophy, but not only volume, the magnitude of volume. So the load needs to be great enough, because essentially you could create a lot of volume by just doing, say for instance, bench press, just using the barbell alone, and obviously you're not going to grow that way. You need a big enough magnitude of load in addition to volume. So it's not just volume, the load is important as well. Right, so let's look at the evidence. I've got a few studies we're going to go through. The first one is one I've mentioned in a couple of the other episodes of the podcast, is the recent Brad Schoenfeld 2013 study, where essentially he measured the hypertrophic growth over a 12-week period for a powerlifting style training and a bodybuilder style training. And the bodybuilder style training was, I think it was sets of 10, whereas the powerlifting group were doing sets of 3, and volume was equated. So this is the biggest key here. Volume was the same, so the total mass of work was the same. So if you're not aware of volume, it's essentially sets times reps times load. And they basically noticed that over the 12-week period that growth was the same in both groups. Now it's also important to note that the group in the bodybuilding group, the sessions were a lot shorter, and the group doing the powerlifting routine, sessions were a lot longer, mainly due to high rest periods. But growth was the same over the 12 weeks. Now just think about it for a second. The time under tension is completely different in both groups. So for example, the group doing sets of 3, you can imagine how quickly those sets would take place. Not a huge amount of time under tension there in comparison to the bodybuilder group. A lot more time under tension, yet volume was the same, growth was the same. Now it's important to note that this was only just 12 weeks, and it'd be interesting to see if this was done over a longer period of time, but hopefully it just gives you an indication of that importance of volume. I mentioned at the start of the podcast, my biggest issue with people focusing too much on time under tension is, for the most part, it reduces the load and therefore can reduce the total volume at the top of the hierarchy of importance. In the next study we have Headley et al. In 2011, and they essentially measured a slow tempo versus a moderate tempo. So the slow tempo was a 4-second eccentric, a 0-second pause at the bottom and then a 2-second concentric, whereas the moderate tempo was a 2-second eccentric, so lower in portion, 0-second pause at the bottom and then a 2-second concentric. Now, one thing that came out was the subjects were stronger during the moderate tempo, which makes sense. Essentially because the tempo was a little bit quicker, you can obviously use more loads. What they then did is they took multiple sets to fatigue and they measured total volume of both groups, the slow tempo and the moderate tempo. And one thing they found out was the moderate tempo group did 11% more total volume in comparison to the slow tempo group. So this just shows you again, if you're using an artificially slow tempo, you can essentially impede the load 1 and thus impede total volume 2, which, like I mentioned, is the biggest driving force for hypertrophy. And then another study, we've got Campos in 2002, and they basically measured 3 different rep ranges. So they had a heavy group, a moderate rep range group, and then a high rep group. So that was like 20 repetitions plus. Again, volume was equated, so that's the key thing. Volume was the same as 3 groups. Growth was the same in the low rep group and the moderate rep group. It's very similar to what Brad Schoenfeld showed in his study. However, the high rep group, even though volume was the same, muscle mass was less in comparison to the other 2 groups. So again, this just emphasizes that volume was equated here. Yes, not just volume, the magnitude of volume, the actual load is important as well. So it needs to be heavy enough. So this is such a key component. So it's not just a case of increasing total volume, the total load needs to be there as well. Now there's a couple of caveats I just wanted to talk about here. What I'm not saying is the time and tension is completely irrelevant. It's not completely irrelevant, but it mustn't impede that total hierarchy of importance, which is load and total volume. And also it's important to address the differences between exercises. I mean, if you're going for a low repetition squat, you're going to be using a relatively quick tempo, or you're trying to move that bar as fast as possible, even though it appears slow. Conversely, to a bicep curl, it's much more easy to control that eccentric. So here's some conclusions and applications. So as we saw during the Brad Schoenfeld study, volume is the most important factor for hierarchy, but in addition to that, load is also important as well. So when you're looking at low rep range and moderate rep range, once volume is equated, muscle growth would be very similar. In the Headley et al. Study, they showed the slower tempo versus the moderate tempo. If you're going too slow with your tempo, this reduces the total amount of work, so the total amount of volume. So therefore, don't put time under tension ahead of total volume and load. Thirdly, when we look at the Campos study in 2002, we found that volume is equated for all the reps, but the load needs to be heavy enough. So as we saw, because they were using 2 lighter loads, despite volume being the same, growth wasn't the same. So here's some big takeaways to focus on. Focus more on increasing training volume, but at the same time, you need to go heavy enough. Don't overly obsess on time under tension, if this therefore means that the load is impeded, therefore using less weight on the bar, and therefore this can reduce total volume. With that said, that's not to say that time and tension is completely irrelevant, and I'm not saying just let gravity move the eccentric portion of the lift. So for example, if you're doing a bench press, don't just completely allow the weight to drop. Control it, but use a moderate tempo, 1 to 2 second eccentric, and then you try and move that concentric as quickly as possible. Now with regards to rep ranges, does this therefore mean that any very high rep work doesn't have its place? Not necessarily, because some high rep work can help with lactate buffering, which is an important component. However, focus on the most part within your training the lower to moderate rep ranges. So you certainly want some strength work within your routine, and this can therefore allow you to move more load and total volume within your moderate rep ranges as well. So using a combination of all those will help increase total volume over a chronic period of time, which is the most important factor. Remember, the load needs to be heavy enough. So I hope you've really enjoyed the episode. This has actually been one of my favourite podcasts. So hopefully you've taken a lot from this and you can start applying this in the gym. So remember, time on attention isn't as important as load and total volume with regards to increasing hypertrophy muscle growth. So thank you very much for listening. Once again, if you're still yet to download my free ebook on my website, go to jameslaytonfitness.co.uk and you can download my free ebook immediately. And the ebook will teach you how to set up a nutrition plan. So it's going to teach you how to set calories, macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates and fats, and teach you how to manipulate these to move you closer to your fat loss or muscle growth goals. If you also want to find out more information about myself, again, go to the website. I've got over 100 videos on my website, dozens of articles, and obviously you can re-listen to all of the previous podcast episodes as well. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care.